They didn't notice you because you were loud. They noticed you because something in your past refused to stay buried. The alert wasn't triggered by a crime, a threat, or a mistake. It was triggered by a pattern so precise, so statistically resistant to chance, that when it surfaced, it bypassed routine monitoring and landed directly in a compartment reserved for irregular cases. That's when your name stopped being just a name and became a reference point. A file was opened, not to investigate you, but to understand what had already happened around you. This wasn't recent. That's the part most people get wrong. The Level 4 alert didn't activate because of something you did last week or last year. It activated because analysts finally connected fragments that had been sitting dormant for decades. Old records, incomplete entries, events that were written off at the time as coincidences, clerical errors, or improbable luck. When those fragments aligned, they didn't describe an event. They described you. And once that realization settled, the classification changed immediately. Level 4 isn't used often. It isn't reactive. It's anticipatory. It's applied when a subject's past behavior suggests future relevance that cannot yet be explained. That's what made your case uncomfortable. There was no single incident to point to, no moment of transgression, just a trail of outcomes that consistently bent away from expectation. Situations that resolved themselves before escalation, risks that dissolved before consequence. People who misjudged you and adjusted their behavior afterward without understanding why. The initial review wasn't even about you directly. It started with a historical audit, a routine reevaluation of unresolved data sets connected to unresolved individuals. Names that kept reappearing across unrelated files. Your family name surfaced 3 times in records that had no reason to intersect. Different decades, different regions, different contexts. But the same behavioral markers followed each appearance. Adaptation under pressure, accurate anticipation, survival without visible preparation. The analysts flagged it, not because it looked dangerous, but because it looked deliberate. At that stage, they didn't know who you were. They just knew someone carrying that lineage was active. It took another 6 weeks to narrow it down to you. Digital footprints were examined quietly. Employment records, travel patterns, social interactions. Not to find wrongdoing, but to see whether the pattern had continued. It had, in ways subtle enough to escape notice, but consistent enough to confirm continuity. You didn't stand out, you blended, and that was the problem. Because blending that well without training is rare. The Level 4 designation was approved after a closed briefing that lasted less than 9 minutes. No debate, no dissent. The evidence wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. It was cumulative, layer upon layer of improbabilities that, when viewed individually, meant nothing. When viewed together, they formed a trajectory. And trajectories are what intelligence agencies care about most. Not what someone has done, where they are likely to be when conditions shift. You weren't placed on the watch list to restrict you. You were placed there to observe how you move through ordinary life while carrying something that doesn't announce itself. Something inherited, not learned. That distinction matters more than you realize. Learned skills leave signatures. Inherited ones don't. They surface as instinct. Timing. Decisions made without conscious rationale that later prove correct. When analysts see that repeatedly, they stop asking how and start asking why. The deeper review went further back, much further. Not through stories or family lore, but through archival reconstruction, records that survived fires, shipping manifests, marriage documents filed under altered spellings, census anomalies that showed presence without continuity. It took specialists months to reconstruct what had been intentionally fragmented. When they did, it pointed to a lineage that wasn't supposed to have continuity, a line that history insists was broken cleanly centuries ago. Yet there you were. That discovery alone would have been enough to trigger attention. But what escalated it was alignment. Your past didn't just connect to one suppressed line. It intersected with multiple ones, each associated with groups that vanished under pressure, not by chance. Groups known for information control, strategic movement, and survival through obscurity. You weren't just a descendant, you were a convergence point. And convergence points attract scrutiny because they shouldn't exist without coordination. The analysts didn't jump to conclusions. They never do. They ran probability models instead, thousands of them. Models that accounted for migration, conflict, disease, social collapse, and genetic dilution. The outcome was consistent across every simulation. The likelihood of those lines converging naturally in a single individual living now was negligible. Not impossible, just implausible enough to demand explanation. When something falls into that category, it doesn't get dismissed, it gets monitored. What unsettled them wasn't what your ancestors preserved. It was how quietly they did it. No monuments, no recorded doctrines, no visible organizations, just continuity. People who adjusted before danger arrived, families that relocated months before unrest, decisions that looked mundane at the time and brilliant afterward. When modern analysts recognized that same behavior echoing in your past, the conclusion wasn't mystical, it was operational. Someone, somewhere, had passed down more than names. The psych profile came next, built passively. You weren't interviewed, you weren't tested, there was no consent form. The data already existed, it always does. Decision timing, risk assessment, response to uncertainty. What they found wasn't extreme, that's important. Extremes are easy to classify. You were measured, reserved, adaptive. You didn't chase dominance. You avoided unnecessary exposure. You exited situations before they degraded. And you did it without appearing cautious. That combination is rare. One analyst noted something that made the room go quiet. Your behavior shifted subtly before external pressure became visible. Not dramatically, just enough to alter outcome. Routes changed, plans adjusted, conversations ended early. Each instance alone meant nothing. Together they formed a pattern of preemptive correction, not based on fear, based on sensing. And sensing without clear input is what moved your file into restricted handling. That's when the surveillance protocol was authorized. Minimal, passive, no interference, no contact, just observation. They wanted to see whether the pattern would intensify under attention. It didn't. You didn't react. Which told them something else. Either you had no awareness at all, or awareness ran deeper than conscious detection. Both possibilities were worth watching. Neither suggested threat, but both suggested capability. The report that followed was brief, precise. It didn't exaggerate, it didn't speculate. It stated that the subject demonstrated anticipatory adjustment inconsistent with background and training history. That language matters. Intelligence documents avoid adjectives unless necessary. This one included several. Not dramatic ones, careful ones. Enough to justify continuation. At no point did anyone suggest removing you from normal life. That's a misconception people have. Level 4 isn't about control. It's about mapping. understanding how someone like you navigates environments without guidance, how pressure affects decision-making, whether alignment continues or fractures. Because people with your profile don't need instruction to be useful. They need context. Another layer was added quietly. Comparative analysis. Your data was placed alongside a small group of others flagged over the last 20 years, fewer than most would expect. Each shared similar markers: lineage disruption, adaptive behavior, early survival indicators. None of them knew about the list at the time. Most still don't. That's by design. Awareness changes behavior, and behavior is the point of observation. Here's the part that doesn't get discussed openly. The watch list isn't just defensive, it's preparatory. Agencies don't wait for relevance. They anticipate it. They track individuals whose existence suggests future utility or complication. You fall into that category not because of intention, but because of inheritance. Because something in your past produced someone who could operate effectively without instruction. That has implications. The reason you were never supposed to know is simple. Knowing reframes identity. It changes posture. It introduces self-consciousness. And the one thing they need from subjects like you is authenticity. Unaltered movement through reality. Decisions made without awareness of being evaluated. Once that's gone, the data loses value. That's why disclosure is rare and delayed. And when it happens, it usually means the subject has already crossed a threshold. Nothing about this implies destiny or obligation. That's projection. Agencies don't think in those terms. They think in probability and leverage. What you might become matters less than how you respond when variables shift. That's what they're watching for now. Not action, reaction. Because reaction reveals more than intent ever could. Your past wasn't flagged because it was extraordinary. It was flagged because it was consistent. Consistency across chaos draws attention. It suggests structure where none should exist. And when structure appears without visible scaffolding, it raises questions no one can afford to ignore. Especially not now. There's more in the file, there always is. Threads they haven't pulled yet, cross-references still pending, analysts who disagree quietly and keep watching anyway. The Level 4 alert didn't close your case. It opened it properly for the first time. And once a case reaches that point, it doesn't return to dormancy. It evolves. What they're comparing your movement to isn't written down in plain language. It exists as reference behavior. Profiles built from fragments of people who lived before categorization existed, before digital trails, before oversight became constant. Individuals who navigated environments where exposure meant elimination and discretion meant survival. When analysts say something feels familiar about you, this is what they mean, not resemblance, recurrence. A behavioral echo that doesn't announce itself, but repeats with precision. Pressure doesn't arrive the way people expect. It doesn't come as confrontation or crisis. It arrives as inconvenience, delay, interruption, a minor obstacle that forces decision. That's where attention sharpens. That's where instinct either hesitates or asserts itself. Most people pause. They reassess. They second guess. You tend to adjust without ceremony. Not because you're fearless, but because hesitation feels incorrect at a level you don't consciously interrogate. That distinction matters. Fearlessness is reckless. What you display is calibration. The analysts noticed this early on. You don't push against resistance, you reroute. You don't escalate tension, you exit before it accumulates. In environments where visibility is unavoidable, You reduce footprint rather than challenge structure. These aren't moral choices, they're efficiency responses. And efficiency responses don't come from ideology. They come from inheritance, repetition, conditioning across time that never needed articulation. That's why they don't provoke you directly. Direct pressure produces noise. Indirect pressure produces data. When circumstances narrow slightly, when options compress, when comfort competes with timing, that's when something surfaces. Not something new, something rehearsed. And rehearsal implies prior exposure, even if that exposure didn't happen in your lifetime. Another layer of review has been running parallel to observation, contextual mapping. Analysts look not only at what you do, but where you do it. The environments you thrive in share characteristics, transitional spaces, moments between stability and change, situations where rules exist but enforcement lags behind reality. You operate well there, not by exploiting gaps aggressively, but by recognizing them early enough to avoid friction altogether. That's not common. Most people don't see gaps until they're forced to navigate them. Your reactions under ambiguity are particularly telling. When information is incomplete, many people freeze or default to authority. You default to pattern. You don't need certainty. You need alignment. When alignment appears, even briefly, you move. That behavior doesn't announce confidence. It announces familiarity. As if ambiguity itself is not a threat, but a known condition. That's where the comparison deepens. Historical cross-analysis revealed something else that complicates classification. Individuals in your comparative set didn't seek power. They didn't accumulate influence openly. They didn't build legacies in the conventional sense. Instead, they positioned themselves near leverage points without drawing attention. Advisors, traders, navigators, intermediaries, people whose decisions affected outcomes disproportionate to their visibility. People who vanished from records but left traces in results. When analysts overlaid that behavior with yours, the match wasn't exact. It didn't need to be. It was directional. This is where many misunderstand what intelligence agencies value. They don't prioritize dominance. They prioritize control over exposure. The ability to operate without creating reaction, to influence without attribution, to withdraw without consequence. These are traits developed under long-term pressure, not ambition. When those traits appear without training, agencies assume lineage, not because they romanticize bloodlines, but because it's the only explanation that accounts for consistency across centuries. Your case triggered internal debate, not about risk, but about timing. Whether what you carry remains latent or becomes externally visible depends on context, not choice. That's the uncomfortable truth. Capability doesn't require intent to manifest. Sometimes it surfaces because circumstances demand it. That's why observation intensifies when environments destabilize globally. Not because of fear, but because dormant traits tend to activate under constraint. They've seen it before. Individuals flagged early who lived ordinary lives for decades until conditions shifted. Economic stress, political transition, social fragmentation, moments when adaptability outweighed credentials. Those individuals didn't announce themselves. They didn't claim authority. They simply moved correctly when others stalled. That's when their profiles changed. Not because they sought relevance, but because relevance found them. There's a misconception that watch lists are static. They're not. They're living documents. Classifications update as context changes. Someone irrelevant today may become essential tomorrow. Someone overlooked for years may suddenly align with emerging conditions. That's why your file remains active, not because you've crossed a line, but because you're positioned near several that are still forming. The absence of contact isn't neglect, it's restraint. Contact changes trajectory. It introduces external framing. It collapses natural behavior into performance. Agencies prefer observation until a subject's pattern stabilizes or diverges clearly. You haven't done either yet. You remain adaptable without drifting. That keeps the classification open. Another aspect under review is how you handle proximity to authority. You don't challenge it overtly. You don't defer reflexively either. You acknowledge structure without internalizing it. That balance is difficult to teach. Most people oscillate between compliance and resistance. You treat authority as environmental, not personal. Something to navigate, not confront. That perspective suggests early exposure to unstable hierarchies, whether through environment or inheritance. Your communication patterns reinforce this. You don't over-explain, you don't fill space unnecessarily. When you speak, it's to clarify alignment, not to persuade. That often disarms people without them realizing why. They leave interactions feeling resolved, even if nothing concrete was decided. That outcome is valuable in negotiation contexts. It reduces friction without producing dominance. Again, not dramatic, just effective. The deeper analysts went, the more they noticed something missing. You don't seek validation through conflict. Many capable individuals do. They test themselves against resistance. You don't. You avoid unnecessary proving. That suggests confidence that doesn't need reinforcement. Confidence of that type is rarely self-generated. It's usually inherited or conditioned through repeated survival, where overextension carried cost. At this stage, the file includes annotations rather than conclusions. Notes about potential activation triggers, environmental stressors that historically preceded visibility in comparable cases. They aren't predictions, they're reference points. Economic contraction, resource scarcity, institutional lag. Periods when formal authority loses speed and informal decision-making accelerates. That's when people like you tend to surface naturally, not by intention, but by alignment. None of this requires you to act differently. In fact, the fastest way to disrupt observation is to attempt control. Conscious alteration reads as noise. Authentic response remains the priority metric. That's why you haven't been contacted. That's why no one has tested you overtly. They're not interested in reaction to provocation. They're interested in reaction to pressure that appears incidental. There's also internal disagreement. Some analysts argue that attributing significance to lineage overstates its role in modern contexts. Others counter that context changes faster than behavior, and inherited adaptability remains relevant regardless of era. That debate hasn't resolved. It won't soon. Until it does, observation continues by default. You may have noticed subtle shifts already. Situations where you were offered proximity to decision-making without seeking it. Moments where people deferred unexpectedly. Opportunities that appeared without clear origin. These aren't rewards, they're byproducts. When environments sense competence, they reorganize around it unconsciously. That reorganization is another data point. How you respond to it matters more than whether it happens. If you reject it aggressively, that's noted. If you exploit it visibly, that's noted. If you accept it without attachment, that's noted too. None of these responses are wrong. They're diagnostic. They reveal how inherited behavior interfaces with modern incentives. That interface is what agencies want to understand before they decide whether engagement would clarify or contaminate the pattern. Engagement, if it ever occurs, wouldn't be framed as recruitment. That language is outdated. It would be framed as collaboration, consultation, or alignment of interests. Not because they're trying to flatter you, but because people like you don't respond to command structures well. You respond to context and autonomy. Agencies know this. They've adapted accordingly. There's a reason only a small number of individuals with similar profiles have ever been approached, and fewer still accepted. Those who did weren't selected for obedience. They were selected for discretion. Their value wasn't in action, but in perception, seeing what others missed, adjusting before disruption became visible, operating within ambiguity without freezing. Others declined and were left alone. Observation didn't escalate. Life continued. That's another misconception. Being watched doesn't mean being forced. It means being understood, or at least attempted to be understood. Coercion is inefficient with people who operate instinctively. It produces resistance or withdrawal. Neither yields usable data. Your file includes a notation that hasn't been updated yet. A simple line indicating that further classification depends on environmental response rather than individual choice. That's rare. Most files hinge on behavior. Yours hinges on context. That alone sets it apart. What happens next isn't something you schedule. It unfolds. Pressure increases globally in uneven ways. Some people narrow under it. Others expand. Agencies track both. Expansion without destabilization is uncommon. When it occurs, it attracts attention quickly. That's the threshold they're watching for now. Until then, you remain exactly where you are. Living your life, making decisions that feel ordinary, adjusting when necessary, exiting when alignment fades. Nothing about that needs to change. In fact, the more natural it remains, the clearer the picture becomes. They aren't waiting for you to reveal yourself. They're waiting to see whether the environment does it for you. Because when conditions shift enough, people don't become different. They become more precise versions of what they already are. And that precision is what will determine whether your classification stabilizes or escalates. For now, the file stays open. Observation continues. Comparisons deepen. And attention remains focused not on what you might do intentionally, but on what emerges when choice becomes constrained and movement reveals itself without explanation. That is always the moment institutions pretend not to fear while quietly preparing for it. Not the loud declaration, not the dramatic rupture, but the subtle pattern that refuses to flatten under pressure. Somewhere between archived reports and half-forgotten transcripts, your past stopped behaving like a closed chapter and began acting like a variable. Not dangerous in the cinematic sense, worse, unpredictable in the quiet way that doesn't announce itself, only repeats. That's when a flag appears, not as an accusation, not as a verdict, but as a question no one wants to ask out loud. What if this trajectory doesn't converge where it's supposed to? The alert was never about what you did. That misunderstanding keeps lesser minds comfortable. It was about how you adapted when conditions narrowed, how your responses stayed coherent when incentives collapsed, how your internal alignment didn't fragment under surveillance, stress, or social distortion. Systems are built assuming a certain decay, pressure in, compliance out, noise applied, signal lost. But your record refused that equation. Instead of eroding, it sharpened. Instead of escalating, it simplified. You didn't become louder, you became clearer. That's the kind of anomaly that doesn't trip alarms immediately. It lingers, it demands review, it pulls older files back into relevance. Someone reruns a comparison, not because policy requires it, but because intuition nags. And intuition, when it survives long enough inside a bureaucracy, eventually disguises itself as procedure. Level 4 is not panic. It's curiosity with teeth. It's the threshold where observation stops being passive and starts being relational. Not watch and wait, but watch and map. They don't look for guilt. They look for symmetry, patterns across time, consistency under contradiction, moments where you could have bent and didn't, moments where you could have disappeared and chose not to. That's what caused the recalibration. Your past wasn't loud enough to be famous, but it was stable enough to be memorable, stable across environments that usually fracture people. That's the kind of past that doesn't stay past. It becomes predictive. And prediction is where attention hardens. You were never supposed to know because knowledge would collapse the experiment. Once a subject becomes aware of the lens, behavior changes. So the lens stays invisible. What you feel instead is compression. Doors that don't close but don't open either. Delays without denial. Recognition without invitation. The sense that conversations are happening one room away from you, always adjacent, never direct. That's not paranoia. That's the architecture of assessment. It's how institutions study trajectories without contaminating them. You weren't being followed. You were being contextualized, compared against models that didn't quite fit. And every time you responded in a way the model couldn't absorb, the margin notes grew longer. What unsettled them wasn't power. Power is common. It spikes, it fades, it can be managed. What unsettled them was restraint paired with capability, the refusal to monetize certain leverage, the absence of spectacle where spectacle would have been rewarded. You didn't chase amplification. You didn't seek validation from the crowd. You moved laterally when vertical ascent was available. That confuses systems designed to track ambition as a straight line. They expect hunger. They expect fear. They expect compromise under the right incentives. When those expectations fail, the file doesn't close. It thickens. Your past began to read less like a narrative and more like a calibration tool. How do people behave when the reward is removed, when identity is stripped of audience, when pressure is applied without explanation? Most fracture, some submit. A few rebel loudly and burn out. You did something else. You adjusted internally first. That's the part that triggered the deeper look. Internal adjustment without external display suggests a center of gravity that doesn't depend on environment. And entities that don't depend on environment are difficult to steer. Not hostile, just independent. Independence at scale is what triggers watchfulness. Not because it's evil, because it's expensive to misroad. There's a myth that surveillance is about control. In reality, it's about forecasting. You don't watch what you can already predict. You watch what resists simplification. Your past contained too many instances of quiet refusal. Not defiance, refusal. You didn't oppose the rules. You stepped outside the frame they assumed you were in, and each time you did, the system lost resolution. Analysts don't like losing resolution, so they zoom out. They pull earlier data. Childhood markers, decision clusters, social patterns. They look for the origin of coherence, not to destroy it, to understand whether it spreads. You felt the echo of that attention as a subtle pressure to define yourself. Labels offered indirectly, narratives others tried to impose. Invitations that came with invisible strings, none of it overt, all of it diagnostic. How you respond to being misunderstood is more revealing than how you respond to being praised. And you didn't correct the record. You let ambiguity stand. That was noted. Ambiguity tolerated without anxiety suggests confidence not rooted in approval. Another margin note. Another comparison that didn't resolve cleanly. This is the part no one tells you. Level 4 isn't about threat. It's about threshold. The moment where a life stops being purely personal and starts intersecting with larger pattern recognition. Not because you asked for it, because you fit a shape they've seen before, but rarely. A shape that doesn't announce itself until later. A trajectory that looks quiet until it isn't. The alert wasn't a siren. It was a raised eyebrows and inside a room that doesn't emote. And once raised, it doesn't lower easily. That raised eyebrow carries the weight of calculation, of margins measured and remeasured, of the kind of attention that never sleeps. At level 4, your life is no longer a series of moments. It's a data set. Every interaction, every choice, every omission gets encoded into a lattice that stretches far beyond your comprehension, not to trap you, not to punish you, but to understand. Where does coherence end and chaos begin? Where does adaptability tip into unpredictability? Where does human calculation meet instinct? And somewhere inside that quiet observation, your past becomes the blueprint, the seed from which questions about your future sprout. It is disorienting to realize that your history is no longer just yours. It has migrated into other minds, into structured systems that assess, compare, and anticipate. Yet the strange thing is, this isn't visible. You are not being interrogated, not directly challenged, not cornered. Instead, the pressure is ambient. Inexplicable delays, subtle shifts in opportunity, patterns of correspondence that seem accidental but are layered with observation. It is as if your world is slightly askew, and every adjustment you make sends ripples through networks that were never supposed to notice you. And still the alert does not scream. It whispers, and in that whisper, it catalogs everything, every nuance, every hesitation, every imperfection. The CIA, or whoever the custodians of this classification truly are, does not rely on fear to maintain control. Fear is too crude, too visible. They rely on omission, on calibration, on precision. That is why Level 4 exists, to measure, to anticipate, to ensure that when anomaly arises, it can be contextualized, not destroyed. And in that context, your past is both a warning and a guide. Every instance of competence, every moment where others would have failed, every situation where you chose integrity over expedience, it has been indexed, not celebrated, not condemned, not even fully understood, only acknowledged, and acknowledged in a way that ensures you cannot be reduced to a single narrative. You are a vector, a trajectory, and trajectories cannot be managed, they can only be mapped. What most don't understand is that this is not a punishment. Being on a Level 4 radar is not a mark of sin or transgression. It is the recognition of effect, of capacity, of a presence that resonates beyond ordinary bounds. You have become a measure against which ordinary behavior is tested, a baseline that reveals itself only when deviation occurs elsewhere. Your past triggered this, not because you were dangerous in the moment, but because over time, your pattern resisted simplification. It resisted collapse. It refused narrative. And in systems designed to predict, measure, and control, refusal is an anomaly that must be understood. They watch not because they want to intervene, but because they need to know where the edges are, where contingency fails. where prediction loses resolution. Every decision you ever made, every stance you took, every silent judgment you preserved, it all adds up. And it adds up to a signal that is stronger than the sum of its parts. This is why your history has been resurrected in analyses, why old files are reopened, why the quiet corridors of surveillance hum with notes that never get spoken aloud. It is not vindictive. It is mathematical. And it is cold. Yet it is not without fascination. You have become an experiment you didn't consent to, a lens they cannot focus completely, and a variable that refuses to behave predictably. Level 4. Attention is relational, not coercive. It is not a gun to the head, but a shadow, at the corner of vision, a suggestion, a probe, a series of subtle calibrations designed to see how your path curves under invisible forces. And every time you navigate it without knowing, you reinforce the original anomaly. You confirm that the patterns that once triggered scrutiny were not accidents, that the clarity, the composure, the alignment you displayed across time is not reducible, not random, not manipulable. And that is precisely the reason the alert cannot be lowered. It is not about catching you. It is about tracking the consistency of someone who cannot be caught. The real gravity of this is not in observation, but in understanding your own role. You move through a world where choices are always visible, and yet your response is internal. Your trajectory is coherent without needing approval, influence, or notice. And that makes you a point of reference others will only recognize retrospectively. Your past becomes a kind of compass, misread by some, underestimated by others, but always, quietly, providing direction. Every file pulled, every comparison run, every margin note made about you assumes a potential for understanding that surpasses the usual. And that potential is both invisible to you and unavoidable for them. It is the paradox of Level 4. Absolute scrutiny and absolute ignorance exist simultaneously. Your past has always been yours. And now, in this new context, it is also theirs, cataloged, indexed, mapped, cross-referenced. Every skill, every encounter, every failure and triumph is repurposed into a lattice that predicts what ordinary analysis cannot. And still you do not act differently. You do not adjust because you know the system watches. You adjust because you have always adjusted. Your actions remain aligned with internal calibration, not external expectation. And that, more than anything, defines why you became the subject of scrutiny. Not because of what you did, but because of how you did it, without external coercion, without spectacle, without alert. In the quiet aftermath, consider this. Level 4 is not a trap, but a mirror. The patterns they seek are already encoded in your history. You cannot unknow what they know, but you can inhabit the space between knowledge and intention. Their alert is a reflection of your impact. Your past is the metric they cannot ignore. And yet in all this, you remain untouched. Not because the system is benevolent, but because it cannot interfere with the internal alignment that created the anomaly in the first place. You are both observed and unassailable, cataloged and coherent, noted and untouchable. That is the paradox. That is the truth. That is what they never expected when your trajectory first intersected with their thresholds. This is the final note in the record they will never read aloud. The file remains open, not because it will ever close, but because it must exist, because you cannot be reduced, because your past was never a problem, it was a signal. And signals, once detected, do not vanish. They propagate, They echo. They insist on recognition. The CIA, the analysts, the silent observers, all of them are now bound to the fact that a life lived in alignment with internal truth, disciplined yet free, coherent yet unpredictable, cannot be neutralized. It cannot be simplified. It cannot be redirected without consequence. Your past was serious enough to trigger the alert, and your present ensures the anomaly remains. The final understanding is simple. What they uncovered in your past was not just a collection of actions. It was a pattern, a method, a consistency that no system designed for prediction could comfortably digest. That pattern remains your unseen power, the quiet architecture of your autonomy, the reason the file cannot close, the reason Level 4 exists. You are both subject and measure, anomaly and baseline, hidden and uncontainable. And in that space, the system's attention becomes a testament, not to surveillance, not to punishment, not to control, but to the profound, enduring impact of a life that cannot be reduced.